Olivos, andaluces de Jaén, andaluces de Jaén.
So hi, my name is Christopher Emdin, and I'm an associate professor of science education at Teachers College, Columbia University. I am here at this conference just for an opportunity to sort of connect with fellow critical pedagogues. And the way that I sort of got married into this world of critical pedagogy was through Joe Kincheloe. Joe was actually an integral piece of my development as a scholar. He was my professor at the Graduate Center, and it was his class that sort of opened up a world to looking at education in a way that goes beyond just teaching and learning in the sort of mundane ways that I've known it. As a student in urban classrooms, as an administrator in classrooms, and as I thought at the time, a researcher. So I just looked at everything through a lens of going in there, doing what it is I had to do, and then leaving when I was done. And after being introduced to Joe and introduced to Paulo's work through Joe, and reading about critical pedagogy and learning how to question and understanding that everything that we do in the classroom is nested in worlds beyond the classroom, I feel like I received what Maxine Green calls a wide awakening. And ever since that moment, I've seen education and seen myself, I've seen my role in life through a different light. This conference has been great because it's just become a reaffirmation of what my beliefs about education have been, just to be around fellow scholars who sort of think and see and look at the world in the same way. We've had such amazing dialogues about everything from sort of the psycho-emotional and talking about anger and its role to paying tribute to Paulo and Pato and Joe and what their work has meant, and to discussions about radical love and its implications on society and its implications on who we are as teachers and teacher educators. The whole experience so far has been, like I said, a wide awakening. The work that I do now is in urban schools in New York City, and also urban schools in Connecticut, and I'm sort of venturing into other areas, geographical areas right now. And pretty much my work is identifying students who have been marginalized from success in science, who, in a sense, I envision them to be an urban indigenous population. They're rooted to their places of origin, these urban streets. It is what they know, who they know. It is what makes them who they are. And because of them being who they are, they've been often perceived as not being able to do well in academically rigorous subjects like the sciences. And so my work has really been in taking ideas, notions, understandings from critical pedagogy and applying it to urban science education, to find ways to make youth of color be connected to science in ways where they thought and others thought could not happen. I do so through dialogue. Freire's work and Joe's work talks about dialogue. So I do so through dialogue, conversations with students about who they are, what they know, and how that applies to science. And it's a very, very interesting and I think powerful work, because looking at critical pedagogy in science education is a challenge, but yet an emotion-charged thing for science educators, for scientists, and for educators, because science is usually perceived to be this sort of objectivist, remove yourself from the discipline, memorization of facts, and even the evolution of the sciences has been a replacing of one established almost deity in the sciences with another. And each of those folks have been, the white male scientist. And so for now, the work is to talk to urban youth of color and present a way where they can become the new scientists. They can gain a command of what's been done before, but they can also open up doors to understanding the world as we know it now, by building upon established knowledges, but also building their own knowledges into play.
Chris, what came first, science or critical pedagogy? Because that's not a common one, hey?
Well, what came first? I think science came first. I've always been a science geek. Yeah, so I vividly remember 7th grade, sitting in a science classroom in Brooklyn, New York, reading about sound waves at home because I thought it was the most amazing and beautiful thing ever. Walking into the classroom and looking on a blackboard and seeing the aim being what are sound waves, and thinking this is going to be it. I'm going to show what I know. But I also remember not being able to share what it is that I knew, because I was too excited. My hands were waving too much. I wanted to share too much, and I remember being shut down. And I remember, you know, starting with this excitement and leaving the class with this dejection and this melancholy. And so I decided then that I'd get into science on my own, but outside of classroom. And outside of the classroom, and slowly I'd be excited outside and through my own discoveries, and I'd be shut down within the classroom. And once I got to college, I think I was able to sort of hone my passion for the sciences, but I have to admit that my experiences in schools did not support my interest in the subject matter. And so as an undergraduate, you're able to explore more. And I think the resilience of urban youth, I am a picture of that in a sense. I tell that story because I was able to develop a resilience that allowed me to not allow my experiences within schools to quell my passion for the sciences.
So Chris, is what you're saying, because that 7th grade moment, did you feel like you were confronting your urban youth? Like, is that what what are you saying there?
Yeah, I think I was confronting my urbanness within that classroom. I was confronted with the non-acceptance of my urbanness in the classroom. And so my urbanness caused me to want to express my knowledge in a way that was moved with verve, with excitement. And the structures of the class, particularly the structures of the science class, did not allow that to happen. And so that moment for me is so significant because as an educator, I found myself replicating the processes that truncated my agency in a classroom. I became the science teacher that I hated. And I entered into a doctoral program and I got exposed to critical pedagogy through Joe and then understood how I was becoming complicit in the maintaining of the science educator as the one who truncates urbanness. And once I got presented with how I am who I hated, it opened up a new world to me. And I decided that my role, my lot in life was to ensure that I found a way that science, this stoic, objectivist discipline, as Joe would describe it, science and its Cartesian, Newtonian, and Baconian underpinnings became challenged through a critical deconstruction of the role of scientist and educator in inhibiting urban youth from being a part of science.
Okay, so now taking it to, like, you know, the teachers in your class, the would-be teachers in your class, because it's one thing to say, oh, you know, we've had people saying that people are angry when they're confronted with their own privilege, or, you know, I mean, what is it dealing with, you know, science teachers? Is that what's happening? Like, are you...
Well, science educators are an interesting breed of folks, I find. And I've taught folks who are not in the sciences as well. But science educators are very interesting because they are educators, because that's who they are sort of training to be. But they're also scientists with a chip on their shoulder. And so, in a sense, they want to represent what science is, as it has been traditionally portrayed. But they also feel like they have to embrace who an educator is, which is someone who is loving, who cares, who wants to embrace students. And they deal with this sort of challenge. And oftentimes, I feel that challenge is dealt with by embracing what a perception of science is more than anything else. What I mean by that is, you have a science educator then who, in educating, is more of a scientist, as more of a prescribed scientist than the scientist is. So in a sense, when I worked in the science laboratory for many years, the science laboratory was a place where scientists would collaborate with each other. They'd share ideas. We would joke. We would laugh. We would have music playing in the background because science has sort of evolved to be more and connected with people. But the science educator, because they want to hold on to being science, actually do not enact any practices that sort of mirror what science is now. And so they become a part of this sort of archaic type of science. And so when teaching those folks, it's a challenge because you want to say to them, listen, you do not want to be a person who is a part of presenting this image of what science is that turns folks off. but they also don't want to be this touchy-feely educator type because they feel like they have to represent science. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but life is full of challenges, and I feel like, you know, I was talking earlier in there about this interesting relationship between potential and kinetic energy and how that relates to how human beings interact in social life. And I feel what you do is you fill these scientists with as much of this thinking about what they're thinking, this metacognitive state as possible. And what happens over time is that you build all of that in them. And once you build that in, at some point it pours out. And when it pours out, that's when they become an educator. And then that's when they embrace not being a science teacher, but becoming a urban science educator who looks at things in the ways that make sense for students.
Okay, you got a lot of hope.
I do.
No, which is good. But take us back to the Paulo Freire, the moment of like, when did Pedagogy depress? Because that must have spoken to something in you that was also intensely frustrated.
Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I happened to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed right after I read The Wretched of the Earth. And what that did for me was it literally gave me hope and concurrently crushed my spirit. And what I mean by that is it gave me hope in the sense that I felt there are people who forever have been thinking about connecting people who have been marginalized, who have been trampled upon, who are passionate about giving them life in the process of teaching. And at the same time, I realized how I was, in many ways, both the oppressed and the oppressor. And that it gave me hope that there was a place to go, and it crushed my spirit because I became everything I didn't want to be. And that's what those two pieces of work did for me. And there are pieces of the work that you pull out of and you quote and you talk about, you know, being awake, and you talk about of giving hope to the marginalized. But for me, it didn't just open up doors of hope. It also unearthed deep things within me that showed me how I was the oppressor of students. How despite the fact that I was an urban child who grew up in places of socioeconomic disparity, because of my having an education, I became classist. And because I became that, I was a piece of the machine that alienated. Frantz Fanon talks a lot about the replication of oppression, and Paulo does as well. And I feel like I became the replicator of oppression through my pedagogy. But I also believe that through those disheartening moments, and reading more about being a critical pedagogue, I realized later that I can't rest in that state. And what those bodies of work did for me also was allow me to begin to sort of ramp up who I was and utilize that bad space to give off positive energy. Joe Kincheloe introduced me to every book that led me to see the world in a different way. Every book that began my quest for more knowledge. I remember the class, man. It was at the Graduate Center at CUNY. I had taken a bunch of other science ed classes, and I've taken education classes and a history of education courses, and it was so funny because I was getting filled with all this information. And I walked into Joe's class, and the conversation that day, the first conversation, was about basketball. And I was like, this guy is friggin' crazy, you know? And he was talking about how there's such genius in basketball because the basketball players learn to improvise, and in improvisation is where genius pours out. And I was like, okay, this guy's gonna be interesting. And then we had broken up into groups, and we all had to have books that we had to present in class. And the first book that he gave me was Ethical Know-How by Francisco Varela. And I opened the book, and I guess Joe knew I was a scientist, So I opened the book, and it was everything other than science. In the first chapter or two, and then the third one was really talking about the sort of socio-biological perspective and how that tied into ethics. And I said, whoa, this is crazy. I've never seen this kind of stuff brought together before. And that book just, it made me hungry. And after it made me hungry, I met with Joe in his office, and he said, yeah, and he just started saying, your experiences are sort of Freirean. And I said, what the hell is Freirean? I had no idea what that meant, you know. I'm a first year doc student. I'm like, it's okay. And I had a puzzled look on my face, and he stopped and he looked, and he gave one of those laughs, and he said, have you read Freire? And I said, no. And he said, you have to read this. And that was my introduction to Paulo Freire and Paulo Freire's work. And then after that, I was just hungry. And so we'd go in and we'd talk for hours, and then he'd recommend another book, or he'd hand me another book, and that was the beginning of my introduction to this world of critical pedagogy, and my embracing of that concept, and then my finding ways to connect that to my passions. And this is another thing that Paulo's work talks about is the embracing of your passion. And Joe always talked to me about, because I always came in, and I remember my conversations with Shirley. I want to do science ed. I'm a science educator. She said, well, Chris, you're always talking about hip hop. You're always talking about hip hop youth. You're always talking about urban youth. And I never thought that I can bring it all together. And through my experiences and my relationships with Joe and Shirley is when I realized that I can bring these passions together because they make perfect sense together. And I guess the classist in me, right? The going through the notion of schooling and moving on and getting this master's degree made me think that those sort of colloquial ways of knowing and being were not valued in the academy, that I couldn't pull that into academic discourse and conversation. And I realized that once I was able to marry the two is when my work really started meaning something, not to others, but to me. And when my work meant something to me, then it began to mean a lot for others. Yeah.
What's going on in here? What was yesterday? Just give us a quick recap.
What's going on in here is brilliance in motion. It's words coming to life. It's passionate words and passionate cries. It's conversations that people have that you see the visceral response, that you can see that it's the emotion pouring out of them as they speak. It is talking about critical pedagogy in ways that you wouldn't ordinarily imagine, because it's talking about it on a practical level. So what do teachers do with curriculum? And it's also talking about it on a sort of ideological level, is how do we make sense of this? And then also on a theoretical level, people are spotting off readings that I'm just like, yes, I must read this, I must read that. I wish I could pull out my laptop and notes. I have tons of pages of notes that of just based on conversation. It was a lunch that was supposed to be an hour that turned into a lunch for 3 or 4, because we're talking and we're thinking and we're building, and it's what's been going on here has really been a rebirth of my passions. I'm so glad that I'm here. I'm so glad that I've gotten an opportunity to speak to the people here and learn from them. What's going on here is brilliance in motion.
Anything we haven't touched on you want to bring up?
What haven't we touched on?
Anything like a little preoccupation, something, a new book you got coming out?
Oh,
what's
yeah, thanks, man. Preoccupation, what's coming out? My book is coming out soon, and I'm so excited about it. It's entitled Urban Science Education for the Hip Hop Generation. It embraces hip-hopness. And discusses how you can use hip-hopness to connect urban youth to science. It talks about my experiences in schools as a teacher and as an administrator. It talks about, it's a bit of autobiography, a bit of theory, and a bit of the practical, and I try to merge it all because they can't be teased out from each other. So what's going on is my book. It should be out in about 4 to 6 weeks if all goes well. What's also going on is I am going to be doing a rap album with my old rap group from college that I abandoned in my quest to for glory in academia. And that I'm really excited about because we're rapping again and we're talking about critical pedagogy in our hip hop, and we're talking about science in our hip hop, and then we're actually having also just straight up battle rhymes. So it's amazing to finally be in a place where I can embrace all my passions and where they all connect together. And that only comes, I would argue that only comes by critically deconstructing self, looking at the world through a new way, and finding out that who we are cannot be teased out from who we are as educators and researchers. And in order to be a full educator, a full scholar, a full researcher means embracing all the pieces of who you are and using that in your work. And so that's where I am right now.
Nice. Chris, it would be remiss of me to not ask if this is a video blog. What are you listening to?
What am I listening to right now? Hip-hop wise, I'm listening to a bit of everything, man.
I'm just asking because you always end your blog, you know. Like
yeah. Well, I know, and I didn't do my last blog like that. I feel like I have to make an amendment to it. But what I'm listening to right now is Slaughterhouse, 4 MCs from 4 different parts of the United States with just raw battle hip-hop, pure lyricism. I'm also listening to KRS-One and Buckshot's new album, beautiful song called Robot that critiques autotune. And although it's a bit commercial, you gotta listen closely to the lyrics, people. Jay-Z's Blueprint 3 is amazing. And that's it.
Andaluces de Jaén, andaluces de Jaén.